Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here today. In your request to Congress, you note that the Northeast Corridor, the Northeast Rail Corridor, is one of the most important transportation assets in the United States. The lifeblood of the region's economy, the NEC carries more than 800,000 people each day on Amtrak and commuter services. That is in your submission to Congress. And so I'm seeking to square that with a budget request to us that guts funding for the Northeast Corridor, that is going to make it fairly impossible for us to even maintain the state of good repair on what is the busiest rail corridor in the country. We carry about half of the country's passengers on a stretch of rail that is relatively short compared to the size of the nation. Your budget cuts the Amtrak NEC program in half, from $650 million to $325 million, and then completely eliminates the State of Good Repair program, which is a federal and state match program that benefits us greatly in the Northeast Corridor. So help me square this. Help me square your recognition that this is the lifeblood of our region's economy with these very draconian cuts. We feel like we have been targeted by this administration and the president for specific cuts in infrastructure funding, and I may ask you another question about that, but help me figure out how I explain to my constituents why we're going to be levied with these enormous cuts, even though the administration seems to recognize that this is a vitally important transportation corridor.
Well, they're not exactly cuts. Amtrak receives about $1.5 billion overall from the federal government. Indeed, it's the Northeast Corridor, which is very important. I take Amtrak all the time myself, is $325 million to support the capital needs. And that has traditionally been the amount that the president's budget requests. There have been enacted amounts which are much higher, but also Amtrak has more than almost $1 billion in cash. If you look at their balance sheet, that is still money on the books that they can be drawing down upon as well.
But that's nothing new. I mean, how can you say they're not?
Why is there idle cash of $1 billion?
But I guess, how can you say they're not cuts? I mean, they are cuts. You are cutting the Northeast Corridor by $325
That's against the
million.
enacted, but against the compared with the president's request, it's always been around this level.
Compared with enacted. Right. Well, that's how we measure cuts, is what we got last year versus what we get this year. So let me ask you another question about something we've talked about before, and that is two particular projects which clog the Northeast Rail Corridor, and that's Gateway and the Portal Bridge. A few weeks ago, FRA released its annual report and funding recommendations on the capital investment grants, and there were 53 projects on that list. Only 4 of those 53 received ratings under the medium threshold. And these
Does that tell you something?
These two projects were amongst those 4. Anyone who has spent any time riding the Northeast Corridor or surveying it knows that the entire system is clogged by the Portal Bridge in particular, but also the inability to get the Gateway project done. I know there is political hostility between the president and the New York delegation, and I know there's financing questions about how you wish the state to go about coming up with that money. We discussed that last year. But to suggest that these are amongst the lowest priority projects within the CIG program, I don't think you find much agreement on that inside the community of those who ride that rail on a regular basis.
Well, these were ratings made not by the political staff. They're made by the career staff, career professionals who look at all these different projects, and based on criteria of financing, of local participation, they were the ones who rated that. The political people don't have any say in any of that.
So so then just tell me, maybe you don't know offhand, but what were the reasons why these projects, which clogged the entirety of the corridor, which happened to be right next to New York City, represented by the minority leader of the Senate, were rated that low?
It's actually quite complicated, and a list of the issues, the problems, were actually shared with the sponsoring organization. And part of that is financing, but it's actually quite complicated. But it's all laid out pretty transparently to them.
All right. Well, I look forward to following up with you on that and trying to work with the Department of Transportation to come up with some alternative plan if it's not the one that's been presented to you in order to finance these projects. We cannot move people and goods up and down the Northeast Corridor if we don't have a way to move forward on the Gateway project or an equivalent and the reconstruction of the Portal Bridge. They're not even in my state. I just know that my state can't move people anywhere without there.
New York and New Jersey, in New York.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.